In the vast expanse of the galactic community, where thousands of civilizations have risen and fallen across millennia, there exists one mystery that has haunted xenolinguists, archaeologists, and historians for over 3 centuries: the Void Script. Discovered on 17 different worlds, carved into monuments that predate known galactic civilization by millions of years, the Void Script appears wherever ancient ruins suggest a once great empire touched the stars. Every major university, every government research facility, every private think tank has thrown their best minds at deciphering these elegant, flowing symbols that seem to dance across stone and metal with an almost organic quality. The script defies every known rule of language evolution. It shows no relationship to any of the 47,000 documented languages in the Galactic Archive. Advanced AI systems capable of translating dead languages from mere fragments surrender in defeat when faced with even complete sentences of void script. The quantum computers of the Zephyrian Empire, machines that can simulate the birth of stars, declare the symbols linguistically impossible. Wars have been fought over void script artifacts. The Kethmoran Collective spent their entire national treasury on a single tablet, convinced it contained the secret to faster-than-light travel. The academic wars of Sector 7 began when competing universities claimed exclusive rights to study a newly discovered void script temple on Kepler 442b. Some species worship the script as divine revelation. Others fear it as a curse from extinct gods. The most rational minds in the galaxy have concluded that whoever created the void script possessed an understanding of communication so advanced, so fundamentally alien, that no contemporary intelligence could ever hope to comprehend it. They had given up hope entirely when a human ship Resilience requested permission to dock at Scholarly Station Meridian. Aboard that unremarkable vessel was Dr. Sarah Chun, a xenolinguist from a species barely 2 decades into galactic society. Her people were considered linguistic primitives by galactic standards, still using crude, sound-based communication and primitive written symbols. Most advanced species had moved beyond such inefficient methods millennia ago, adopting direct neural interface languages or pure mathematical communication protocols. Yet Dr. Chun carried with her something that would shatter every assumption the galaxy had made about intelligence, language, and the power of human intuition. A simple leather-bound journal, worn smooth by countless hands, filled with pages of handwritten notes in a dozen human languages. And on page 6 of that journal lay the key to unlocking the greatest mystery in galactic history. What Sarah Chun discovered would not only revolutionize the understanding of the void script, but reveal a truth so profound about humanity's place in the universe that would reshape the very foundations of galactic civilization. For sometimes, the most advanced solutions come not from the most sophisticated minds, but from those brave enough to think in ways that the rest of the galaxy had long forgotten. The story begins when the impossible becomes inevitable, and a young human woman proves that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs come from the most unexpected places. The docking bay of Scholarly Station Meridian hummed with the efficient activity of a dozen different species, each conducting their research with a methodical precision that had made the station the premier academic facility in the Outer Rim. Dr. Vexheim Moreland, the station's chief xenolinguist, watched through the observation window as the human vessel Resilience maneuvered toward docking bay 7 with what could charitably be called adequate skill. Vexheim's 4 arms gestured dismissively as he spoke to his assistant, a young Zephyrian named KLYTOS whose crystalline features reflected the harsh station lighting. Another human researcher requesting access to the Void Script archives. They arrive weekly now, ever since their species joined the Galactic Accord. Such persistence, yet so futile. KLYTOS consulted his neural interface, data streaming directly into his consciousness. This Dr. Sarah Chun submitted credentials from the University of New Geneva. Her specialization appears to be historical human linguistics with a focus on dead languages. Curious choice for someone hoping to crack the void script. Dead languages, Vexheim repeated with amusement. The humans still study their own primitive communication methods, as if they held some cosmic significance. How quaint! His tentacled lower appendages rippled with what passed for laughter among his species. Still, protocol demands we grant her access. Perhaps she'll provide some entertainment during the research period. The Resilience settled into its docking cradle with a slight tremor that spoke of well-used but maintained equipment. Through the airlock came Dr. Sarah Chun, carrying a worn duffel bag and what appeared to be an ancient leather-bound book. She was unremarkable by galactic standards. Average height for a human, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, clothing that was functional rather than fashionable. What struck Vexai as odd was her complete lack of advanced equipment. No neural interfaces, no quantum tablets, no AI-assisted translation devices that had become standard for any serious linguistic research. Dr. Chun, Vexai greeted her with the formal politeness reserved for visiting researchers. Welcome to Scholarly Station Meridian. I am Dr. Vexai Moreland, Chief of Xenolinguistic Studies. I understand you wish to examine our void script collection. Sarah smiled, and Vexai noted the humans displayed emotion through facial muscle manipulation, another primitive trait that most advanced species had evolved beyond. Thank you for accommodating my request, Dr. Moreland. I know my credentials aren't as impressive as most researchers who study here. Your species' enthusiasm for learning is commendable, Vexai replied diplomatically. Though I feel obligated to inform you that the void script has resisted analysis by the finest minds in the galaxy. The Academic Council of Proxima Beta spent 40 years on a single tablet with no progress. The DeepMind AI of the hegemony processed every known linguistic pattern and declared the script undecipherable. KLYTOS stepped forward, his crystalline form chiming softly as he moved. Perhaps you have new computational methods? Advanced pattern recognition software from human space. Sarah's laugh was warm and genuine. Actually, I don't use computers for initial linguistic analysis. I find they can impose assumptions about how language should work rather than letting the language speak for itself. The silence that followed was profound. Vexai's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he processed this statement. You intend to analyze the void script manually? Without computational assistance? That's right, Sarah confirmed, seemingly unaware of the shock her statement had caused. I brought my research journal and some basic tools. Sometimes the old methods work best. KLYTOS crystalline features flickered with rapid data processing. Dr. Chun, with respect, the computational power required to analyze even basic void script patterns exceeds the capacity of most organic brains. The symbol relationships alone involve mathematical progressions that require quantum-level processing to map. Sarah hefted her leather journal. Maybe, but every language starts with someone making marks and sounds to represent ideas. Before all the mathematics and processing, there's just the desire to communicate. I thought I'd start there. Vexai found himself genuinely curious about this human's approach, even if it seemed hopelessly naive. Very well. We'll provide you with access to Primary Archive Vault 7, which contains our most complete void script specimens. You'll have full research privileges for 14 standard days. As they walked through the station's corridors, Sarah took in the sophisticated displays showing linguistic research from across the galaxy. Holographic representations of alien languages floated in the air, their structures mapped out in complex three-dimensional models. Teams of researchers worked with AI assistants to decode fragments of extinct communications, their efforts supported by technology that could simulate the birth and death of entire languages. Impressive setup, Sarah commented, pausing before a display showing the evolutionary tree of the Andorian language family. How long have most species been studying linguistics this way? The computational approach has been standard for approximately 8,000 years. KLYTOS replied. When the first quantum language processors were developed, they revolutionized the field. Why struggle with organic limitations when machines can process billions of linguistic variables simultaneously? Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Makes sense, though I have to wonder, when you're looking for patterns that no one has ever seen before, might it help to use methods that no one has tried recently? Primary Archive Vault 7 was a cathedral of academic achievement. The walls displayed the finest examples of void script ever discovered, each piece illuminated to show every subtle detail of the mysterious symbols. The centerpiece was the Kepler monolith, a massive stone tablet covered in flowing void script characters that seemed to shift and dance when viewed from different angles. "This is our crown jewel," Vexhai explained, gesturing toward the monolith with obvious pride. Discovered in the ruins of Kepler 442b, it contains the longest continuous passage of void script ever found. 137 symbols arranged in patterns that suggest narrative structure. But no one knows what it says, Sarah finished. She approached the monolith slowly, and Vexhai noticed that she didn't immediately begin taking measurements or photographs like most researchers. Instead, she simply stood before it, studying the symbols with an intensity that seemed almost personal. The working theory, KLYTOS offered, is that the script represents a form of communication so advanced that it operates on principles entirely foreign to contemporary understanding. Some researchers believe it might not be language at all, but rather a form of mathematical notation or even artistic expression. Sarah opened her leather journal and pulled out a simple pen, an actual physical writing implement that Vexhai hadn't seen used in decades. What if it's none of those things? What if it's just language? "I beg your pardon?" Vexhai asked. "Language," Sarah repeated, beginning to sketch the first few void script symbols in her journal with careful precision. Communication between people who had something important to say to each other. Maybe the reason no one has cracked it is because everyone's looking for complexity when the answer might be simpler. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with methodical patience, hand-copying symbols, and making notes in what appeared to be multiple human languages. Her approach seemed almost archaic compared to the sophisticated scanning and analysis equipment available, but there was something compelling about her complete focus on the symbols themselves. "Fascinating technique," observed Dr. Indar Kaseth, a Rigelian linguistics expert who had arrived to observe the human's work. Her elongated cranium housed one of the most advanced organic computational matrices in known space, capable of processing linguistic data at near AI speeds. "Though I confess, I don't understand the methodology." Sarah looked up from her journal, pen still poised over the page. "I'm looking for emotional resonance patterns. Most languages, even the most sophisticated ones, carry emotional undertones that reflect the psychological patterns of their creators. The way symbols relate to each other often mirrors how the speakers related to each other and their world. Emotional resonance. Yindarse, cranial regis furuit. But the void script shows no correlation with any known emotional pattern matrices. We've run complete psychological profiles on every conceivable form of sentient consciousness. Have you considered that maybe they felt things differently than current species do?" Sarah asked. "Or that their emotional patterns might be encoded in ways that don't match contemporary models?" This question created an uncomfortable silence. The gathered researchers exchanged glances that spoke of shared expertise, and shared assumptions suddenly called into question. The idea that emotional patterns might not be universal constants had implications that extended far beyond linguistics. As the first day concluded, Sarah had filled several pages of her journal with carefully hand-drawn symbols and notes written in multiple human languages. Her progress, by conventional standards, was minimal. She had examined perhaps 30 of the hundreds of symbols available. Yet something about her approach had drawn an audience of increasingly curious researchers. "Dr. Chun," Vexhai ventured as she prepared to leave for the day, "might I ask about your journal? It appears to contain multiple human writing systems." Sarah smiled and opened the journal to show pages covered in different scripts, what appeared to be various human languages written in distinct character sets. Mandarin, Arabic, Sanskrit, Cherokee, Mayan glyphs, Egyptian hieroglyphs, Linear B, and a few others. I find that switching between different writing systems helps me see patterns I might miss if I stick to just one. KLYTOS crystalline form chimed, with rapid data processing. You're using primitive writing systems to analyze advanced alien script? The logical framework seems inverted. Maybe, Sarah agreed cheerfully. But here's the thing about human writing systems. We develop them independently in different parts of our world, often with no contact between cultures. Yet certain patterns show up everywhere. Humans seem to think about communication in consistent ways, regardless of their specific circumstances. I'm wondering if that might be true for other species too. Dr. Eendar leaned forward, her computational matrix working at high speed. Are you suggesting that the Void script might follow universal communication principles? I'm suggesting that whoever wrote it was probably trying to tell someone something important, and they probably thought about communication the same way most sentient beings do. They wanted to be understood. Sarah closed her journal and gathered her materials. Tomorrow I want to focus on the symbol groupings. I have a theory about grammatical structures. As the human left Archive Vault 7, the assembled researchers found themselves facing questions they hadn't considered in years. In their pursuit of technological sophistication and computational power, had they somehow overlooked fundamental principles of communication itself? Was it possible that the most advanced linguistic mystery in galactic history might yield to the most basic analytical approaches? Vexhai found himself looking forward to the next day's work with an anticipation he hadn't felt in decades. There was something about Dr. Sarah Chen's approach that suggested possibilities beyond conventional academic wisdom. Whether she would succeed where others had failed remained to be seen. But her presence had already accomplished something remarkable. She had reminded some of the galaxy's finest minds that sometimes the most profound questions required the simplest methods to answer. That night, as the station settled into its research cycle, Vexhai made an unusual notation in his official research log. Human researcher presents unconventional methodology. Approach shows promise despite lack of technological sophistication. Recommend continued observation. It was the first time in his career that he had recommended watching someone work with primitive tools rather than advanced equipment. In her modest quarters aboard the Resilience, Sarah Chen sat at a small table, her journal open before her. By the light of a simple lamp, she continued sketching void script symbols, her pen moving across the page with practiced precision. Occasionally, she would pause to make notes in one of her many human languages, cross-referencing patterns she was beginning to recognize. On page 6 of her journal, surrounded by careful drawings and multilingual annotations, a single line of text waited in flowing cursive handwriting. Remember, language is memory made visible. It was a note she had written months ago, before she had ever heard of the Void script, based on her study of how humans preserve their stories across generations. Tomorrow, that simple observation would change everything. Sarah arrived at Archive Vault 7 the following morning to find an unexpected gathering. Word of the human researchers' unconventional methods had spread through the station's academic community overnight, drawing spectators from disciplines far beyond xenolinguistics. Dr. Thexela Grandis, the station's chief archaeologist, stood near the Kepler monolith with her assistant, while representatives from the Department of Ancient Civilizations clustered around monitoring equipment they had hastily assembled. Dr. Chun, Vexhai greeted her with what seemed like genuine enthusiasm. I hope you don't mind the attention. Your approach yesterday sparked considerable discussion among the faculty. Sarah surveyed the assembled researchers with mild amusement. As long as I don't mind me working the way I work. I tend to talk to myself quite a bit when I'm analyzing patterns. Please, proceed as if we weren't here, Dr. Grandis assured her. The hegemony archaeologist's six-legged stance shifted with barely contained excitement. We're particularly interested in your theory about grammatical structures. Opening her journal to the pages she had filled the previous day, Sarah approached the monolith with the same methodical patience that had characterized her initial examination. However, today she seemed to move with increased purpose, as if overnight consideration had crystallized certain possibilities in her mind. Yesterday, I noticed something interesting about symbol repetition, she began, speaking as much to herself as to the assembled observers. Most of the researchers have focused on individual symbol meaning, which makes sense from a computational standpoint. But human languages often embed meaning in relationships between symbols rather than in the symbols themselves. KLYTOS chimed softly. Could you elaborate on that distinction? Sarah pointed to a section of the monolith where three similar symbols appeared in sequence. Look at these three here. Computer analysis would examine each symbol individually, catalog their unique characteristics, and attempt to assign meaning based on their internal structure. But what if the meaning isn't in the symbols themselves, but in the fact that there are three of them? Dr. Indar's cranial ridges furrowed as her computational matrix processed this suggestion. You're proposing that the void script uses positional or quantitative meaning systems? Not exactly, Sarah replied, making careful sketches in her journal. I'm proposing that whoever wrote this thought about communication the way humans do when we tell stories. Watch. She opened to a page covered with notes in various human scripts. In Mandarin, symbol meaning can change based on tone and context. In Arabic, the same root letters can create entirely different words depending on the pattern used. In Cherokee syllabics, meaning emerges from the combination of syllables rather than individual characters. She turned back to the monolith, her pen moving across her journal page as she traced symbol patterns. What if the void script doesn't just record information? What if it tells stories? And what if the story structure itself carries meaning? This suggestion caused a stir among the observers. The idea that the void script might be narrative rather than informational challenged fundamental assumptions about its purpose and structure. Stories, Dr. Grandis repeated slowly. But the mathematical analysis suggests highly sophisticated data encoding. The symbol relationships follow patterns that appear to be computational rather than linguistic. Sarah paused in her sketching and looked up at the towering archaeologist. What if they're both? What if this civilization developed a way to embed complex information in narrative structure? Humans do that too, actually. Our creation myths, our historical epics, our moral tales, they all carry multiple layers of information encoded in story form. Dr. Thexula's 6 legs shifted in a pattern that indicated deep consideration. You're suggesting that the void script represents some form of data storage disguised as narrative? Or narrative that naturally incorporates complex data, Sarah corrected. Think about it. If you wanted to preserve important information across thousands of years, what would be more durable? A technical manual that only specialists could read, or a story that people would want to tell and retell? The implications of this perspective rippled through the assembled researchers. If Sarah was correct, then centuries of analysis had been approaching the void script from the wrong direction entirely. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with increasing intensity, filling page after page of her journal with symbol patterns and multilingual notes. She appeared to be testing her hypothesis by applying narrative structure analysis to different sections of the monolith, looking for patterns that would indicate story elements like character introduction, conflict development, and resolution. There, she said suddenly, pointing to a section near the top of the monolith. This pattern here repeats with variations throughout the entire text. If this is narrative structure, this could be a recurring character or theme being introduced. KLYTOS activated his recording systems. Can you explain your reasoning? Sarah opened her journal to show comparative notes written in several human scripts. In human storytelling, we use what linguists call leitmotifs, recurring elements that represent important concepts. Look at these examples from different human cultures. She showed pages containing what appear to be excerpts from various human stories written in different languages. The pattern is consistent across cultures that never had contact with each other. If sentient beings naturally think about communication in similar ways, then alien storytellers might use similar techniques, Dr. Indar finished. Fascinating hypothesis, but how would you test it? By finding the beginning of the story, Sarah replied, moving to examine the leftmost edge of the monolith. If this is narrative, it should start with setting establishment, where and when the story takes place. Those elements should appear near the beginning and provide context for everything that follows. The assembled researchers watched with growing fascination as Sarah systematically examined the early sections of the void script text, making detailed notes about symbol frequency and pattern distribution. Her approach was unlike anything they had observed before. Instead of analyzing individual symbols in isolation, she was examining the entire text as a unified composition. Dr. Chun, Dr. Grandis ventured after several hours of observation. Your methodology appears to assume that the void script creators thought about communication in ways similar to humans. Isn't that rather anthropocentric? Sarah looked up from her journal, considering the question seriously. Maybe, but consider this. Every species in the galactic community has developed language systems that serve similar functions, conveying information, expressing emotion, preserving knowledge, creating social bonds. The specific mechanisms vary, but the underlying purposes are remarkably consistent. She gestured toward the monolith. If the beings who created this were trying to communicate across vast spans of time and space, wouldn't they use the most universal principles possible? Wouldn't they want to create something that any intelligent species might eventually understand? This perspective sparked intense discussion among the observers. The possibility that the void script might have been deliberately designed for cross-species communication had never been seriously considered, largely because it seemed impossibly optimistic. You're proposing that this civilization deliberately created a universal language? Vexai asked. I'm proposing that they created something they hoped would be universal, Sarah clarified. Whether they succeeded remains to be seen. As the day progressed, Sarah's confidence in her narrative hypothesis appeared to strengthen. She had identified what she believed to be recurring thematic elements and had begun mapping character relationships based on symbol interaction patterns. Her journal grew thick with comparative notes drawn from human storytelling traditions spanning thousands of years of Earth's history. The beautiful thing about stories, she explained to the assembled researchers, is that they're self-correcting. If you misunderstand one part, the context usually provides clues to help you figure out what you missed. Technical manuals don't do that. If you don't understand a technical term, you're stuck. But stories want to be understood. Dr. Indar's computational matrix worked at high speed as she processed this concept. Are you suggesting that narrative structure itself serves as an error correction mechanism? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. And if I'm right about this being a story, then there should be internal consistency that can guide interpretation. Characters should behave consistently. Cause and effect should follow logical patterns, and the resolution should make sense in terms of everything that came before. Late in the afternoon, Sarah made a discovery that sent excitement rippling through the research community. While examining a section of symbols that appeared approximately two-thirds through the monolith text, she identified what she believed to be a pattern indicating dramatic climax, the moment in a story where central conflicts reach their peak. If this is the climactic sequence, she explained, sketching the symbols with careful precision, then everything before this point should have been building toward this moment, and everything after should deal with the consequences. That means I can use this as a reference point to understand the overall story structure. The implications were staggering. If Sarah could identify the story's climax, she might be able to work backward and forward to understand character motivations, plot development, and thematic significance. For the first time in centuries of study, someone had a methodology for approaching the void script as a unified whole rather than a collection of isolated symbols. Dr. Chun, Vexai said as she prepared to conclude her second day of research, I must ask, do you genuinely believe you can decipher the void script using these methods? Sarah closed her journal and looked up at the towering monolith. I believe that whoever created this wanted to tell a story that would survive long after they were gone. Stories are humanity's oldest technology for preserving meaning across time and cultural barriers. If I'm right about that, then yes, I think it can be deciphered. The question is whether I'm good enough at reading stories to understand what they wanted to say. As the research community dispersed for the evening, an unusual energy filled Archive Vault 7. For the first time since the discovery of the void script, Someone had presented a coherent methodology for interpretation that didn't require assumptions about advanced alien psychology or impossible technological capabilities. Sarah's approach was grounded in the most fundamental aspects of communication itself, the universal desire to be understood and remembered. That evening, emergency academic conferences were convened across the station. Department heads who hadn't spoken to each other in years found themselves collaborating to understand the implications of Sarah's work. If she was correct about narrative structure, it would revolutionize not only void script studies, but the entire field of xenolinguistics. In her quarters aboard the Resilience, Sarah sat with her journal open to page 6, where her handwritten note about language being memory made visible had taken on new significance. She had begun to suspect that the void script wasn't just preserving information or telling a story. It was both simultaneously. It was a civilization's memory of itself, encoded in narrative form to ensure that the essential truths of their existence would survive even when their cities turned to dust and their names were forgotten. Tomorrow, she would begin testing her most ambitious hypothesis yet, that the void script contained not just any story, but a specific type of story that appeared in some form in every human culture she had ever studied. If she was right, then the key to understanding this ancient alien text lay not in advanced technology or sophisticated computation, but in the most basic human understanding of how people tell each other what matters most. The discovery waiting on page 6 of her journal would soon prove that sometimes the greatest mysteries yield to the simplest truths, and that the path to understanding alien minds might run through the deepest understanding of one's own species' most fundamental characteristics. The third day brought an unprecedented gathering to Archive Vault 7. News of Sarah's breakthrough in narrative analysis had reached the highest levels of academic authority on scholarly Station Meridian. Dr. Zinthara Vox, the station's director and one of the most respected xenolinguists in the galaxy, had arrived to observe the humans work personally. Her presence, along with representatives from 3 different galactic universities and 2 government research agencies, created an atmosphere of intense anticipation. Sarah seemed remarkably unaffected by the attention. She arrived carrying her worn leather journal and the same simple pen she had used for the previous 2 days, greeting the assembled dignitaries with the same friendly politeness she had shown the junior researchers. If anything, the pressure appeared to have sharpened her focus rather than intimidating her. Dr. Chun, director of Vox, began, her forearmed form radiating the authority that had made her the most influential linguistic researcher in the Outer Rim. The reports of her work have created considerable excitement throughout the academic community. However, I feel obligated to point out that narrative interpretation of the void script has been attempted before, without success. Sarah opened her journal to pages dense with comparative notes and symbol sketches. May I ask what approach those previous attempts used? Dr. Vox gestured to KLYTOS, who activated a holographic display showing the work of previous research teams. The standard methodology involves computer-assisted pattern recognition to identify potential narrative elements, followed by mathematical modeling of story structures from known galactic literature. Interesting, Sarah replied, studying the displayed analysis. But that approach assumes that alien storytellers would use the same structural patterns as contemporary galactic civilizations. What if they didn't? Then, how would you propose to identify narrative elements at all? Dr. Indar interjected. Without reference frameworks from known literary traditions, any interpretation becomes purely speculative. Sarah smiled and opened her journal to page 6, where her handwritten note about language being memory made visible was surrounded by annotations in multiple human scripts. What if the reference framework isn't contemporary galactic literature, but something more fundamental? Something that might be true for any species that develops storytelling. She approached the Kepler monolith with renewed purpose. Her journal opened to pages covered with what appear to be excerpts from human stories written in various languages and scripts. Yesterday, I identified what I believe to be the climactic sequence of the narrative. Today, I want to test a specific hypothesis about what type of story this might be. Dr. Thexula leaned forward, her six-legged stance indicating intense interest. What type of story? A creation myth, Sarah replied, beginning to sketch symbols with careful precision. Every human culture has them, and they all share certain structural elements despite developing independently. They explain where people came from, why the world is the way it is, and what their place in the universe means. The silence that followed was profound. The assembled researchers exchanged glances that spoke of shared expertise and shared skepticism. Creation myths were considered primitive storytelling forms, far too simple to account for the mathematical complexity and sophisticated symbol relationships demonstrated by the void script. Dr. Chen, Director Vox, said carefully, "Creation myths are among the most basic forms of narrative expression. The void script demonstrates linguistic sophistication that far exceeds such elementary storytelling." Sarah paused in her sketching and looked up at the director. What if sophistication doesn't mean complexity? What if it means the ability to embed profound truths in simple, memorable forms? She returned to her journal, flipping through pages that contained what appeared to be creation stories from various human cultures written in their original scripts. Look at the structural similarities. She showed the assembled researchers pages containing excerpts written in cuneiform, hieroglyphs, Chinese characters, and various alphabetic scripts. Despite the visual diversity, her annotations revealed recurring patterns: initial chaos, creative force, separation of elements, establishment of order, creation of life, and final meaning-making. These patterns appear in human creation myths regardless of when or where they were developed, Sarah explained. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, Mesopotamian creation epics, Norse cosmology, Mayan creation accounts. They all follow similar progressions because they're addressing the same fundamental questions that any intelligent species would ask about existence. Dr. Indar's computational matrix worked at high speed. You're proposing that the void script follows these universal narrative patterns? I'm proposing that if this is a creation myth, it should follow these patterns regardless of which species created it, because the questions being addressed are universal. Sarah turned back to the monolith, her pen moving across her journal page as she traced symbol relationships. And if I'm right then, I should be able to map the story structure and begin extracting meaning. Over the next several hours, Sarah worked with an intensity that commanded the attention of every observer. She appeared to be testing her hypothesis by examining different sections of the void script text for elements that corresponded to universal creation myth components. Her journal filled with detailed symbol analysis accompanied by comparative notes from human mythological traditions. "Here," she said suddenly, pointing to a section near the beginning of the monolith. "If this follows creation myth structure, this should be the description of primordial state, the condition that existed before creation began." She studied the symbols carefully, making detailed sketches and notes. These symbol relationships, they're consistent with descriptions of unity or undifferentiated potential. Kale White-TOS activated his recording systems. "How can you determine that from symbol relationships alone?" Sarah opened her journal to show comparative examples from human creation myths. In every human creation story, the pre-creation state is described using language patterns that emphasize wholeness, potential, or void. The specific words vary, but the linguistic structures are remarkably consistent. She pointed to excerpts written in various scripts. Here's how it appears in Genesis, in the Enuma Elish, in the Popol Vuh, in the Rig Veda. Different languages, different cultures, different time periods, but similar grammatical approaches to describing the indescribable. Dr. Grandis' archaeological training provided a different perspective. But how can you apply human linguistic patterns to an alien script? The underlying cognitive processes might be completely different. Sarah considered this question seriously. They might be, but if they are, then the void script is truly undecipherable by any contemporary intelligence. However, if intelligence itself follows certain universal patterns, if the questions that drive consciousness are similar across species, then maybe the ways of expressing those questions follow similar patterns too. This philosophical framework sparked intense debate among the observers. The possibility that consciousness itself might impose universal constraints on communication was a concept with implications far beyond linguistics. As the day progressed, Sarah's confidence in her creation myth hypothesis appeared to strengthen. She had identified symbol sequences that corresponded to what she interpreted as the fundamental stages of creation narrative: initial state, creative impulse, separation and organization of elements, establishment of natural laws, and the emergence of consciousness. The beautiful thing about creation myths, she explained as she worked, is that they're not just stories about the past. They're instruction manuals for understanding the present. They tell you what matters, how the world works, and what your place in it should be. Late in the afternoon, Sarah reached the section of the monolith she had identified as the climactic sequence. Her analysis of this portion would be crucial for validating her entire interpretive framework. If her creation myth hypothesis was correct, this section should describe the moment when conscious beings emerged in the created universe. If I'm right about this being a creation myth, she said, her pen moving carefully across her journal page, then this climactic section should describe the emergence of the creators themselves, the moment when they became aware of their place in the cosmos they had discovered or been born into. She worked in intense concentration for nearly an hour, comparing symbol patterns with examples from her collection of human creation myths. The assembled researchers watched in fascination as she appeared to decode meaning from symbols that had resisted analysis for centuries. "Oh," she said suddenly, her pen stopping mid-stroke. She stared at the symbols before her with an expression of dawning comprehension. "Oh my, Dr. Chun," Director Vox prompted. "What have you discovered?" Sarah looked up at the assembled researchers with an expression that combined excitement with profound concern. "If my interpretation is correct, this isn't just a creation myth. It's a warning." The statement sent ripples of tension through the research community. The possibility that the void script contained warning information rather than historical or cultural material had never been seriously considered. "What kind of warning?" Dr. Indar asked, her computational matrix processing possibilities at high speed. Sarah returned to her journal, flipping back to page 6, where her note about language being memory made visible was surrounded by increasingly complex annotations. "According to my interpretation, this creation myth describes a civilization that achieved perfect harmony with their universe. They understood their place in creation so completely that they became one with the fundamental forces that shaped reality." "That sounds like a positive achievement," KLYTOS observed. "It would be," Sarah replied, "except that according to this story, when they achieved that perfect harmony, they transcended physical existence entirely. They became one with the universe in the most literal sense possible. They ceased to exist as individual beings." The implications of this interpretation struck the assembled researchers with profound force. If Sarah was correct, the void script wasn't just a record of an ancient civilization. It was their final message, carved in stone because they knew they were about to transcend physical existence forever. "You're suggesting that this civilization deliberately chose to stop existing?" Director Vox asked, her forearms gesturing with barely controlled excitement. "I'm suggesting that they achieved a form of enlightenment that made continued individual existence impossible," Sarah clarified, "and that they left this message as a warning for other civilizations who might follow the same path." She turned back to the monolith, her journal open to pages covered with comparative analysis of human cautionary tales and wisdom literature. Every human culture has stories about the dangers of seeking too much knowledge or power. What if this is the ultimate version of that story? A warning from beings who achieved ultimate understanding and paid the ultimate price. As the research day concluded, the academic community found itself grappling with possibilities that challenged every assumption about the nature of intelligence, consciousness, and existence itself. If Sarah's interpretation was correct, the void script represented not just a linguistic achievement, but a philosophical revelation that could reshape understanding of what it meant to be conscious in the universe. That evening, emergency sessions were convened throughout the galaxy as news of Sarah's potential breakthrough spread through academic networks. The possibility that an ancient alien civilization had achieved transcendence and left a warning for future species created both excitement and profound unease among galactic leadership. In her quarters, Sarah sat with her journal open to page 6, where her simple note about language being memory, made visible, had become the foundation for an interpretation that might change the course of galactic civilization. Tomorrow, she would need to complete her analysis and determine whether her creation myth hypothesis could withstand rigorous scrutiny. The key insight that had unlocked the void script's meaning lay not in advanced technology or sophisticated computation, but in the most basic human understanding of why people tell stories in the first place, to pass on the most important truths they have learned about existence itself. Sometimes the greatest mysteries yield to the simplest wisdom, and sometimes the most profound warnings come from those who have learned too much for their own survival. The fourth day at Scholarly Station Meridian began with an atmosphere of electric anticipation that extended far beyond Archive Vault 7. Representatives from the Galactic Academic Council had arrived during the night cycle, along with diplomatic observers from 3 major stellar governments. The potential implications of Sarah's work had reached the highest levels of galactic leadership, transforming what had begun as routine research into an event of civilization-wide significance. Sarah arrived to find the archive chamber expanded with additional observation platforms and recording equipment. The simple research environment of 3 days previous had been transformed into something resembling a formal academic trial, complete with official witnesses and historical documentation systems. For the first time since her arrival, she appeared slightly intimidated by the attention. Dr. Chun, Director Vox, began formally. Before we proceed, I want to emphasize the significance of this moment. If your interpretation of the void script proves accurate, you will have achieved something that the finest minds in the galaxy have attempted for over 3 centuries. However, the claims you made yesterday are so extraordinary that they require the highest standards of verification. Sarah nodded, clutching her worn leather journal with hands that trembled slightly. I understand the responsibility. I've spent most of the night reviewing my work, checking for errors or alternative interpretations. I'm as confident as I can be, but I know that confidence doesn't equal correctness. Dr. Yenthala Morvok, the chief representative from the Galactic Academic Council, leaned forward with her full attention focused on the human researcher. Dr. Chun, before we examine your final interpretation, could you explain once more how you arrived at your creation myth hypothesis? The Council requires complete documentation of your methodology. Sarah opened her journal to the early pages where her comparative work began. It started with my observation that the void script might be narrative rather than informational. When I began looking for story structure, I noticed patterns that reminded me of human creation myths. The more I analyzed the symbol relationships, the more convinced I became that this text was addressing the fundamental questions that any conscious species would ask about existence. She approached the Kepler monolith and began pointing to specific sections. Here at the beginning, we have symbols that describe a state of unified potential, what humans would call primordial chaos or the void before creation. Here in the middle, we see the process of differentiation and organization, the emergence of distinct elements and natural laws. And here, near the end, we see the description of consciousness emerging within the created universe. KLYTOS activated comprehensive recording systems. And it was in that final section that you identified the warning element. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. But to understand the warning, you need to understand what they achieved. She opened her journal to pages dense with symbol analysis and comparative notes. According to my interpretation, this civilization didn't just study the universe. They learned to participate in its fundamental creative processes. They became conscious partners with the forces that shape reality itself. Dr. Grandis shifted her six-legged stance in a pattern indicating deep concern. You're describing abilities that approach omnipotence. How could any physical beings achieve such capabilities? Sarah flipped through her journal to show examples from human mystical traditions. Humans have stories about similar achievements: enlightenment, transcendence, unity with cosmic forces. What makes this different is that these beings apparently succeeded completely. She looked up at the assembled researchers with an expression of profound seriousness. And, according to the warning embedded in their creation myth, complete success was the problem. Over the next several hours, Sarah methodically presented her complete interpretation of the void script text. Working section by section, she demonstrated how the symbol patterns corresponded to the classical structure of creation mythology, while simultaneously encoding a sophisticated philosophical argument about the nature of consciousness and cosmic responsibility. The creators of this text want us to understand something crucial, she explained as she reached the climactic section of the monolith. They achieved perfect harmony with the universe. They understood every natural law, participated in every creative process, and experienced consciousness on a cosmic scale. But in doing so, they lost their individual identity. Director Vox interrupted with evident confusion. Lost their identity? You mean they died? Not died, Sarah clarified, studying the symbols carefully. They became one with everything. They achieved such complete integration with cosmic processes that they ceased to exist as separate beings. They became the universe itself, but in doing so, they lost the individual perspective that made them who they were. The philosophical implications of this achievement sparked intense debate among the observers. The idea that ultimate enlightenment might result in the loss of individual consciousness challenged fundamental assumptions about the goals of intellectual and spiritual development. Are you certain of this interpretation? Dr. Eendar asked, her computational matrix working at maximum capacity. The concept of voluntary consciousness dissolution seems counterintuitive for any species that achieved sufficient sophistication to create this text. Sarah opened her journal to page 6, where her note about language being memory made visible was now surrounded by complex annotations in multiple human scripts. That's exactly why they left this warning. They want other species to understand what they learned too late. That perfect understanding comes at the cost of individual existence. She pointed to a specific symbol sequence near the end of the monolith text. Here they describe the moment of transition. According to my interpretation, they realized what was happening just before it became irreversible. They had time to carve this warning, but not enough time to change their fate. As Sarah continued her presentation, the true sophistication of her interpretation became apparent. She had not simply translated individual symbols or identified narrative structure. She had decoded an entire philosophical system that addressed the fundamental questions of consciousness, knowledge, and cosmic responsibility. The void script text, according to her analysis, was simultaneously a creation myth, a scientific treatise, and a cautionary tale about the ultimate limits of enlightenment. The most remarkable aspect of this warning, Sarah explained as she neared the conclusion of her presentation, is its compassionate intent. These beings achieved something that most species would consider the ultimate goal: perfect harmony with the universe itself. Yet they used their final moments of individual existence to warn others about the price of that achievement. Dr. Morvock leaned forward with intense interest. Are you suggesting that this text argues against the pursuit of ultimate knowledge? Not exactly, Sarah replied thoughtfully. I think it argues for conscious choice in that pursuit. They want other species to understand what perfect enlightenment actually means, so that if we choose that path, we choose it with full understanding of the consequences. The assembled researchers spent the remainder of the day scrutinizing Sarah's interpretation, testing it against established principles of linguistic analysis and philosophical reasoning. Teams of experts examined each component of her methodology, searching for flaws or alternative explanations that might invalidate her conclusions. To their growing amazement, Sarah's interpretation proved remarkably robust. Her creation myth hypothesis provided coherent explanations for symbol patterns that had puzzled researchers for centuries. Her narrative analysis revealed internal consistency and philosophical depth that satisfied even the most skeptical observers. Most importantly, her approach yielded a complete, meaningful interpretation of the entire void script text, rather than fragmentary guesses about isolated symbols. Dr. Chun, Director Vox, said, as the formal evaluation concluded, pending final verification by the Academic Council, it appears that you have accomplished something unprecedented. You have not only deciphered the void script, but revealed a philosophical framework that challenges our fundamental assumptions about the goals of conscious existence. Sarah closed her journal and looked up at the Kepler monolith with an expression of profound respect. The real accomplishment belongs to whoever created this text. They faced the ultimate choice about the nature of existence, and they used their final opportunity for individual action to help others make that choice consciously rather than accidentally. As evening approached, secure communications channels carried news of Sarah's achievement to the highest levels of galactic government. The successful translation of the void script represented more than an academic breakthrough. It was a revelation that would influence the future development of every intelligent species in the galaxy. That night, emergency sessions of the Galactic Council were convened to discuss the implications of the translated text. The warning about transcendence posed fundamental questions about the appropriate limits of scientific and philosophical inquiry. Should advanced civilizations actively avoid achieving perfect cosmic understanding? Was individual consciousness worth preserving even at the cost of ultimate enlightenment? In her quarters aboard the Resilience, Sarah sat with her journal open to page 6, where her simple observation about language being memory made visible had become the key to unlocking the greatest mystery in galactic history. The note itself was unchanged, but its significance had transformed completely. She had discovered that language was indeed memory made visible, and sometimes the most important memories were warnings about paths that should not be taken. Tomorrow would bring formal verification of her translation and the beginning of what promised to be the most important philosophical debate in galactic history. The beings who had created the void script had achieved perfect understanding and paid the ultimate price for that achievement. Now it fell to contemporary civilizations to decide whether that price was worth paying, armed with full knowledge of what the cost would be. The greatest linguistic mystery in galactic history had been solved not by advanced technology or sophisticated computation, but by a human researcher with a worn journal and an understanding that the most profound truths are often the simplest ones. Sometimes the key to understanding the cosmos lies not in reaching for the stars, but in understanding the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. 3 months after Sarah Chen's breakthrough at Scholarly Station Meridian, the galaxy found itself grappling with questions that no civilization had ever seriously considered. The successful translation of the void script had sparked the most profound philosophical crisis in recorded galactic history, forcing every advanced species to confront fundamental assumptions about the nature of progress, enlightenment, and conscious existence itself. Sarah stood before the assembled delegates of the Galactic Council on Proxima Central, the same worn leather journal in her hands that had contained the key to unlocking humanity's greatest contribution to galactic knowledge. The chamber, designed to accommodate representatives from hundreds of different species, hummed with translation fields and cultural adaptation protocols as beings who had never agreed on anything found themselves united in their need to understand the implications of her discovery. Honored delegates, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite her obvious nervousness at addressing the most powerful leaders in known space. 3 months ago, I believed I was simply attempting to solve an interesting linguistic puzzle. I had no idea that the solution would challenge every assumption we hold about the ultimate goals of consciousness. The translation of the Void script had been verified by 12 independent research teams using methodologies ranging from quantum computational analysis to traditional philological techniques. Sarah's interpretation had withstood every challenge, revealing a philosophical framework of stunning sophistication embedded within what appeared to be a simple creation myth. The beings who had carved those symbols into stone had indeed achieved perfect cosmic understanding, and had voluntarily ceased to exist as individual entities as a direct result. Chancellor Vex Thorin of the Hegemony Coalition leaned forward, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lighting into complex patterns. Dr. Chun, the implications of your translation extend far beyond academic interest. Several member civilizations have already begun restricting advanced research programs based on the warnings contained in the Void script. We need to understand whether this text represents factual warning or philosophical allegory. Sarah opened her journal to pages now filled with additional notes and verification data provided by research teams across the galaxy. Honored Chancellor, the evidence strongly suggests that the Void script describes actual events rather than allegorical teaching. The mathematical precision of the cosmic processes described, the specific mechanisms of consciousness integration, and the detailed warnings about irreversible transcendence all indicate experiential knowledge rather than theoretical speculation. This confirmation sent ripples of concern throughout the assembled delegates. If the Void script warning was based on actual experience, then the path to ultimate enlightenment was not theoretical but achievable and catastrophic for individual consciousness. Ambassador Tlanazuris of the Academic Consortium spoke next, her six-armed form graceful despite the obvious tension in her posture. Dr. Chun, your interpretation suggests that these ancient beings achieved what most civilizations would consider the ultimate goal of intellectual development. How do we reconcile the apparent desirability of cosmic understanding with a warning against pursuing it? Sarah considered the question carefully, flipping through her journal to find notes she had made during the countless debates and discussions that had followed her initial translation. Ambassador Xeris, I think the key lies in understanding what the creators of the Void script mean by choice. They don't argue against the pursuit of knowledge. They argue for conscious understanding of where that pursuit leads. She gestured toward the holographic display that showed the complete Void script text alongside her translation. According to their account, they achieved cosmic consciousness gradually, without realizing that each step was making it impossible to return to individual existence. By the time they understood what was happening, the process had become irreversible. They want other species to make that choice deliberately, with full knowledge of the consequences. The philosophical implications of conscious choice in transcendence sparked intense debate among the delegates. Some species argued that the warning validated their traditional approaches to limiting advanced research. Others contended that conscious choice in transcendence might represent the ultimate expression of free will. Still others suggested that the warning proved the necessity of achieving cosmic understanding in order to make truly informed decisions about existence itself. Dr. Morland Kess of the Outer Rim Research Alliance raised a concern that had been troubling many advanced civilizations. Dr. Chun, several of our most sophisticated research programs appear to be approaching the early stages of cosmic consciousness integration. Should we halt these programs based on an alien warning we may not fully understand? Sarah looked up at the towering display showing the Void script translation, her expression combining respect for the ancient text with concern for contemporary civilization. Dr. Kess, I don't think the creators of this warning expect us to halt the pursuit of knowledge. But I do think they want us to understand that perfect knowledge comes with a price that can't be paid partially. She opened her journal to page 6, where her original note about language being memory, made visible, was now surrounded by annotations from dozens of different researchers and philosophers. The beings who created this text achieved something magnificent. They became one with the fundamental forces that shape reality itself. But in doing so, they lost the individual perspective that made them unique conscious entities. Are you suggesting that individual consciousness and cosmic understanding are mutually exclusive? Chancellor Vexthorn asked. I'm suggesting that according to this warning, perfect cosmic understanding requires the dissolution of individual boundaries, Sarah replied. The question each civilization must answer is whether that transformation represents transcendence or extinction. Over the following hours, the Galactic Council grappled with decisions that would influence the development of every member civilization. The Void Script warning had revealed that the path to ultimate enlightenment was both achievable and irreversible, forcing species to make conscious choices about the limits they would accept on their own development. Some civilizations chose to establish strict boundaries on advanced research, preferring to preserve individual consciousness even at the cost of limiting cosmic understanding. Others decided to pursue transcendence as the ultimate goal of conscious existence, accepting the loss of individuality as an acceptable price for perfect knowledge. A few chose to continue existing research while developing protocols for conscious choice and transcendence, hoping to achieve cosmic understanding while retaining the option to choose individual existence. The remarkable achievement of your species, Dr. Chun, observed Elder Vichatara of the Contemplative Orders, is not simply the translation of an ancient text, but the preservation of choice itself. These beings used their final moments of individual existence to ensure that future civilizations could choose their fate consciously rather than stumbling into transcendence accidentally. Sarah nodded, closing her journal and looking up at the assembled delegates. I think that's exactly what they intended. They achieved the ultimate goal of conscious existence, perfect understanding of the universe itself. But they discovered that perfection comes at a cost that can't be undone. They want us to know what we're choosing before we choose it. As the formal session concluded, Sarah found herself surrounded by delegations from dozens of different species, each seeking guidance about how to apply the Void Script warning to their own research programs and philosophical traditions. The simple human linguist who had arrived at Scholarly Station Meridian with nothing but a worn journal and an unconventional methodology had become one of the most influential voices in galactic civilization. In the months that followed, Sarah's translation work spawned new academic disciplines dedicated to understanding the relationship between consciousness and cosmic knowledge. The Void Script warning became required study for any research program that approached fundamental questions about the nature of reality. Most importantly, the ancient text served as a permanent reminder that the ultimate achievements of consciousness might require sacrifices that could not be undone. Dr. Vexai Moreland, who had initially dismissed Sarah's primitive methodology, became one of the leading advocates for what became known as intuitive linguistics, the application of fundamental communication principles to linguistic mysteries that resisted computational analysis. Dr. Chen demonstrated something that our technological sophistication had obscured, he explained to his students. Sometimes the most advanced solutions come from the most basic understanding of what language is for. On Earth, Sarah Chun returned to her modest position at the University of New Geneva, her worn leather journal now preserved in the Galactic Archive as one of the most significant research documents in known history. She continued her work with dead human languages, applying the same methodological principles that had unlocked the Void Script to preserve and understand the linguistic heritage of her own species. The journal entry on page 6 that had provided the key insight for her breakthrough was eventually displayed in a Museum of Galactic Achievement on Proxima Central. Remember, language is memory made visible. Below it, a plaque explained how this simple observation had revolutionized understanding of the relationship between consciousness, communication, and cosmic knowledge. The Void Script warning continued to influence galactic civilization for generations, serving as a permanent reminder that the ultimate questions of existence require both courage to seek answers and wisdom to understand the full implications of finding them. The ancient beings who had achieved perfect cosmic understanding had given the galaxy an unprecedented gift, the knowledge necessary to choose transcendence consciously rather than achieving it accidentally. In her final report to the Galactic Council, Sarah wrote, The creators of the Void script achieved something that most species would consider impossible. They found a way to preserve individual choice even beyond the limits of individual existence. They used their final moments as separate conscious beings to ensure that future civilizations could make informed decisions about the ultimate nature of consciousness itself. That may be the greatest achievement in the history of intelligent life. Choosing to preserve choice itself, even when perfect knowledge would eliminate the need for choice. Years later, as advanced civilizations across the galaxy continued to grapple with the fundamental questions raised by the Void script warning, one truth remained constant. Sometimes the greatest mysteries yield to the simplest wisdom, and sometimes the most profound warnings come from those who have learned more than survival allows. The human species had given the galaxy not just a translation, but a choice, the choice to transcend consciously or to preserve individuality deliberately, armed with full knowledge of what both paths would cost. The lost language had defied all records until a human opened her journal to page 6, where the simplest truth about communication had become the key to understanding the most complex questions about existence itself. In the end, the greatest linguistic achievement in galactic history had been accomplished not through advanced technology, but through fundamental understanding of why conscious beings communicate with each other in the first place. To share what matters most, even when sharing it requires the ultimate sacrifice.